Hi, my name is Christoph Reichert. I'm the founder of CBR Technology. We are Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central Tier 1 service provider and implementation partner in California, offices in Orange County as well as San Francisco. Today I would like to discuss the payment method functionality in the Business Central solution, and that functionality can be utilized both on the AR as well as the AP side of the system. So obviously accounts receivable, accounts payable. Now there are a number of areas that you need to be well aware of as you use that functionality. We need to discuss the capabilities of a payment term versus a payment method, and how this capability may also cause you some troubles if you are not aware of how to use it correctly. And I'd like to go through a demo of how you would use this on an accounts payable side for a vendor as well as an accounts receivable side for a customer. Having said this, let me dive into the actual product. So this is Kronos USA, a fictitious company that all of you have access to. It's part of the standard Microsoft deployment of the Business Central solution. Switching to that company is easily done through the My Setting configuration here on the top right hand side. Now I'd like to go over the payment configuration and payment terms and payment methods. So first of all, let's start with payment terms because this is obviously a commonly used area of the system, and this is some sample data that I've put together here, and this is your standard net, COD discount date type of configuration. Nothing real special about this. What is a common misperception is that payment terms and payment methods are not related to each other. So just because you selected a certain payment term, it does not drive any sort of functionality in the payment method. So please be aware of that. I've had a number of clients that come up and say, hey, I selected this option on payment terms. Why didn't it select a related or logically related payment method? And there simply is no business logic relationship between a term and the method. Now, in the payment method, you do also have to be quite careful when you configure this, but on the payment methods, which are both used on the AR side as well as on the accounts payable side of the system, I've configured and reconfigured some of the sample data. This is not the listing you will get when you go to your Kronos USA. This is slightly modified to make it more obvious for the purposes of our video here. But I'd like you to note that you can relate a payment method option to either a GL account or a bank account. For example, I've set up two examples where my corporate American Express card is being used for the purposes of typically accounts payable vendors, as well as a corporate checking account, a primary checking account with my bank that is being used when customers pay me. So I've modified this. This is not the standard setting, and of course we are here to help you and assist you if you need any help configuring this, so please feel free to reach out to us. But what happens is as you use this, you can activate automatic functionality in the system. So if you leave the GL account setting on the type as GL account and you leave a blank balance account number in there, this system will not create any sort of additional business functionality. It will simply allow you to say, when this transaction was recorded, I'm using a certain payment method, like for example, the account function, payment on account. It will just reflect on how you normally do business with this vendor or this customer, but it doesn't actually trigger any additional business transaction. Now, the two options I did configure differently is American Express and the checking account. So if, for example, you have a customer on which you assigned this checking account, and then you create a sales invoice for the customer, the system will automatically process and post a payment to offset this invoice immediately using this checking account. So this is utilized for automatic transactions where a customer pays you immediately using a credit card, not their credit card, but it credits your credit card account. So if you have, for example, a Stripe account or some sort of a credit card processing setup, and every time a customer posts an invoice, you want there to be a payment record that appears in that amount for the invoice amount automatically because of the way you're collecting funds from the customer. You can do that by linking the payment method to a GL account or to a bank account. There's also a lengthy conversation you can have about using bank accounts versus GL accounts. In my example here, I'm using bank accounts for reconciliation purposes and bank transfer purposes. Now, having said this, I like to start with the American Express option on the accounts payable side because that's a very frequently used configuration. So what this is used for is I have certain vendors that I do business with, and whenever I do an invoice transaction with this vendor, so this is a purchase invoice, they charge my corporate American Express card automatically. There's never an exception to that rule. Whenever I do a business transaction with that vendor, I use that corporate credit card. And for that purpose, you can utilize this payment method functionality. Now, this will not work properly if sometimes you use a corporate credit card and sometimes you use a checking account and sometimes you use a different card. Then this will not work and you shouldn't configure it this way. But in my example, I've selected a airline for travel purposes, and whenever I charge a flight ticket on my airline account, I always use my corporate American Express card. There's never an exception to that, and the charge always occurs right away. There's never a difference in the delay, which is another issue. Is you should only use these automatic payment features in the payment method function if the payment occurs right away. If there's any sort of net 30 delay or net 60 delay or any sort of delay on this, you should not utilize this feature because this is assuming you're making the payment right away on the same date as the invoice transaction. So the system will not give you an option to use a different date for the payment. So that's another area that you need to be aware of. Now, having said all of this, I'm going to show you the setup. The setup is pretty straightforward. So in my sample company here, I created a United Airline sample vendor, and on this vendor, when I do business with this airline, I always charge my payment method to my American Express card. So in the payment method here, I put down American Express. I don't have terms with them. They don't give me net 30 or net 60. When I buy a ticket, I have to pay for it right then and there, which is why I put this on COD. But one of the other things I was trying to point out earlier was that there's no relationship between terms and method. So if I did set this to net 60 or something, it would not affect on how the system processed the payment method transaction as part of that. So I'm leaving this at COD. The payment method is in fact my American Express corporate card. So because of the way I've configured the payment method, this will trigger a payment automatically. So for example, here you see a balance on United Airlines right now is 0. I don't owe this vendor any money, and I'm going to do a transaction that will demonstrate this point. So I'm going to go create a purchase invoice, and I'm going to create a new transaction here, new AP voucher, and I'm selecting my United Airlines airline, and here is the vendor. And have some vendor information. So let's say I'm doing a transaction here and I'm flying somewhere and I need to charge it to my travel fee. So I'm going to do a GL account to my travel expense account, or let me pull something out here out of the GL account section here. I'm not sure. Let's just grab let's just make this part of my advertising. So I'm traveling somewhere for marketing purposes, and I'm flying to travel to New York for an event, and in here I'm just recording the fee. So let's say the airline is charging me $1,200 to fly there and back, and here's my transaction. So this is the invoice. I just booked the flight. I paid for it immediately on my corporate American Express card. I'm recording the invoice. As soon as and of course I can attach an incoming document with the PDF, but as soon as I post this now, two things will happen. It will post a purchase invoice for $1,200, hitting the GL account 60200, but it will also create a payment on my American Express card immediately. So just by hitting post here once, it will of course ask me if I want to verify to post it. It will post it immediately, and I'm going to show you on the AP side what this will look like. It'll ask me if I want to see my posted invoice in the history file. I'll say no to that because I don't care about that right now, but I'm going to go back to my vendor, I want to show you that United Airlines balance is still showing 0. So if I go to United here, you see the balance of 0, and you'll say, okay, why did that happen? And the reason why is because it auto-paid the invoice. So when I go to my vendor ledger information here, I'll see 2 transactions, even though I only posted 1. I posted the invoice for $1,200, which is this line here, but then the system automatically generated the payment on my American Express card immediately. And this will now be a liability on my American Express card. The way I set this up, you can see that if I go to my chart of accounts and I look at my liability section on the balance sheet, you'll see under American Express credit card I now owe $1,200. And when I go to the bank account setup, I set up the credit cards as a bank account. You'll see that there is now a balance on my American Express card for $1,200 that I owe. When I pay the American Express card, I simply transfer money between my checking account and my American Express credit card. And that's how I handle American Express setup, which is quite slick process of doing that, because this way I am retaining the vendor-based history for each vendor that's involved in this transaction. A lot of folks out there use American Express as a vendor, and when they get all their charges on the American Express card, they put in an invoice for American Express and then try to put all the GL distributions that way. And although that's a quick and easy way of doing it, it doesn't really solve the accounting issue of giving you more visibility into what vendor has done business with you for what purpose. So that's on the AP vendor side. The AR side is pretty straightforward as well, in that when you set up a customer in here, and I have a customer that I've configured Adaptum Corporation in here that is automatically paying with charging their card their charges onto our checking account. So when they generate an invoice, we have it configured where money is being paid immediately on our checking account, and we want to record that in accounts receivable as well. So same concept. If you look at the payment method here that I configured, is this particular payment method goes into my primary checking and it's auto pay, which means if I create an invoice, it will also create the payment immediately. So in here again, I'm going to record an invoice for this customer. So I'm going to go to sales invoice, and I'm going to create a new transaction. And I'm just going to go and put in the customer that I just selected here, Adaptum. And let's say I'm not selling them product, but I'm going to sell them just a revenue GL account range here on my revenue income section of my P&L. And let's just say it's a job sales balance here and describe it. And let's say there's $1,000 charge for this particular invoice. So here we are, $1,000. So again, when I post this, and by the way, the payment methods are showing up. The terms are showing up in here, as well as the payment method. So if for some reason you don't want to auto pay this automatically, you could technically remove this payment method here, and it would take that out at that time and not process the payment right away. But because this is linked to that and I post this invoice, you will see that it will update the both the invoice and the payment at the same time. I forgot, of course, my tax code, so I do apologize. Let me just put that on here, over here. So that's just, let's say, material non-taxable sale. And I'm going to post the invoice for it. And it will update all my subledgers and main ledgers automatically. But when I go back to the customer Adaptum, you'll see that the balance is still 0. But when I go into the customer ledger record for this transaction, you will see that the invoice is there for $1,000 as well as the payment. Now, interesting enough, in here you'll see a 2% difference, and that's because this vendor has a 2% cash discount allowance set up, and so it didn't actually charge $1,000 but only put in $980. So that's another thing to be aware of. Also on the AR side of things, if you do a credit memo rather than an invoice, this functionality will not be utilized. And if the customer has a credit balance on AR account, it will not auto apply that to the invoice either. So if you use this payment method, just be aware of how the system works here exactly, and how you would like to drive this auto pay functionality in your solution. Of course, we're here to assist you, 855-227-0700. Our team handles implementations of Business Central, data migration, training of your team, ongoing maintenance, and we'll be more than happy to assist you. Please feel free to reach out to us. Have a great day. Take care.